What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Thoughts with Nick. Do you ever find yourself feeling trapped in the repetitive nature of everyday life? Maybe you feel stuck in the routine of waking up, going to work, coming home, and making dinner. Maybe you put in some laundry, throw on the TV, and then before you know it, it's the morning and you're starting all over again. If you're in that position, which I've been countless times, chances are you find yourself craving something a little extra to bring you that fulfillment that you maybe aren't getting from life as we know it. And that's exactly what I want to talk about today. Getting started with the quote, today's quote comes from myself, and what I have to say is, in order to reach true novelty, one must first make peace with mundanity. And before really getting into the video, I want to define those two terms as I'm going to be using them a lot throughout the video today. So first we have mundanity, which simply means the mundane. The commonplace activities that I just mentioned earlier, going to work, cooking dinner, doing laundry, all that type of stuff. You know, we don't necessarily love it, but those are our obligations and we must fulfill them. On the other hand, we have novelty. This can almost be thought of as the opposite of the mundane. It's things that aren't necessarily a part of that daily routine. They're a little bit outside of the norm. They're exciting, and as a result, they kind of have this allure about them that makes you crave and want to engage with them. And what I'm going to be talking about today is kind of the juxtaposition of those two ideas and how I believe the cyclical nature of everyday life leads people to crave novel experiences on a daily basis, and how the common outlets or examples of that novelty aren't really what we're looking for. So, as I mentioned, the daily routine where we all go to work and then you come home and maybe it's 5 p.m. so all of a sudden now you kind of got to get dinner ready and it's a mad scramble to accomplish whatever you can with the remaining hours of the day. It doesn't leave us with a lot of time to pursue other ventures, to really get that fulfillment out of life that we're craving. I mean, if you're getting that from your job, good for you, seriously. A lot of people aren't, and a lot of people don't really get the chance to engage with their passions on a daily basis. So if that's already your life, then you're ahead of the curve. But anyway, a lot of people, that's not the reality, and it leads them to want to engage with some sort of novelty on a daily basis because they feel that their life is so mundane. And I'm not saying that this is a conscious thought. I'm just saying that this is a very natural urge and craving that's elicited from the lack of novelty or really excitement on a daily basis. It leads us to crave something, some different experience outside of the norm. And I think this is also exacerbated by technology and social media because novelty is so ubiquitous today just through our phones. You can go online and peruse social media and there's just countless novel items. I don't know exactly how best to phrase that, but novelty is quite literally at your fingertips. So it makes that craving more robust, I guess you could say. It's more frequent. You almost kind of develop the craving to an additional level because novelty is so close at your disposal. But outside of technology, a few places that I see people turning to novelty quite frequently are drugs and alcohol, like weed, alcohol, as I just mentioned, drinking, stuff like that, pornography, gambling, and I would even be willing to throw in things like coffee and fast food in there because those can still be considered as examples of things that are somewhat outside of the norm. So I kind of want to get into how these things aren't really fulfilling that sense of novelty that you're looking for, and what I kind of term them as is watered down novelty, or almost a light version of novelty, because these things, they're not actually fulfilling that void. They're not really bringing you what you're looking for. They're just kind of band-aiding the wound, so to speak. You know what I mean? It's not really healing that sense of loss that you have. So first of all, the drugs and alcohol, that kind of stuff, it creates a partition between you and reality, which is, exactly why people engage with it, because that partition is a sense of novelty. It's a escape from the norm, but in the same respect, that escape is a detachment, and that's not what you want. You're removing yourself from the daily life. And, as I'll get into in a little bit, on occasion, there's nothing wrong with this, but when it turns into an everyday thing as your sense of novelty, that's really bad, and it's really pretty much just escapism when you boil it down, And I think, especially with drugs and alcohol, but with a bunch of this other stuff too, when you use these as your novelty, you develop a tolerance. So, maybe at the end of the day after work, or when you finish your obligations for that novelty, you're smoking a bowl of weed. Okay, it's just one bowl, right? But then in time, that bowl is not quite taking you to that novel place that it did before. So now you need 2, and then you need 3, and then the weed isn't even cutting it. It's just become another part of your daily routine. So now the weed is mundane, and then now you have to have a beer or a shot with the weed. And next thing you know, you're full on getting fucked up regular weekday nights. And that is absolutely not the place you want to be. And I think a lot of people, well, I hope not a lot of people, but I think many people find themselves in that position unintentionally, just looking for something to cope with the burdens of everyday life, how repetitive it is, and how that kind of weighs on your mind, and that's what they turn to for escape. And it really kind of distances you from reality. It can even further that sense of disillusionment, and I think that's really, really problematic. And next up, we have pornography, which is just all around bad, I think. It allows people to really see the total heights of sexual novelty. There's just so many fucked up things that you can see on those sites, and it totally distorts your perception of what sex is and the relationships around sex, and it really corrupts what I think is kind of like a sacred interaction, but that's beside the point of today's video. But just like those other things, just like the drugs and alcohol, I think pornography, it can be very similar in terms of the tolerance, where people, they start with, just looking at it, but then just looking at it doesn't necessarily arouse them quite the same way anymore. So then they have to turn to more intense stuff. And like I just mentioned, that novelty is fully available on those sites. You can reach the heights of depravity on those sites with ease. And I think that starts to really bleed into everyday life, where those normal sexual interactions, as a man, you see all these commercials nowadays for fucking erectile dysfunction medication. That's not normal, yo. You can't get it up because you've been watching too much porn. Your tastes are out of whack, and you can't get hard for the regular shit because your mind and your neural pathways are so corrupted with pleasure coming from these extremely novel circumstances and situations that you've seen on the internet that are so far removed from, normal sexual exchanges. And that's bad. That's really, really bad. And in addition to that, I think it really corrupts relationships too, because it encourages this almost desire for multiple partners, because that's a novelty in itself. You can't be happy with just one person. You need to have these other experiences. You need to get something on the side. And I think a lot of that kind of stems from watching porn, because you're insatiable. You have an insatiable hunger for sexual experience, and all of it is kind of because you're craving that sense of novelty in the form of sexual experience. And that's not what sex is about. That's not what sex should be about, And like I said, it really corrupts and destructs relationships, because it undermines the inherent bond that the relationship is built upon. And I think that's a really sad thing. And, maybe that requires a video in its own right, but I think I summarized it pretty well there. Next is gambling. And, similar to what I just said, that really deserves a video in its own right too. I have some really strong personal reservations about gambling, just because the way I see it is that you're throwing away your money, you're throwing away your hard-earned bread, and it's like, for what? For that fleeting sense of excitement and intensity on whether or not your bet's gonna hit. Like, is that really worth it? Because when you lose, you feel like a fool, don't you? I would. I don't gamble, but I know I would feel like that. I'd feel like shit. And, honestly, I'd be willing to put in, like, quick turnaround investment schemes in there, like the people who try these get rich quick investing schemes. I think that could be a sense of a failing sense of novelty as well, because you're trying to just get this quick come up, this quick new novel thing where you put money on this thing and then, oh, now all of a sudden I'm rich. That's not really how things work. I mean, if it does, you're really lucky. You can make good plays with investing, but similar to what I was just saying about gambling, these two things go hand in hand. I don't know anyone personally that's, had a ton of success in either one of those things when it comes to, like, making one quick play to make your fortune. In the long term, I do know people who have done well investing, but it's a long-term game, and people get caught up in these short money chasing operations, and I think a lot of times it leads to destruction, and it all stems back from the craving of novelty. And just to, I guess, speak on one example from my experience where I found myself chasing novelty is energy drinks. And it started of just like, I was tired after work, so I'd grab a energy drink to go to the gym, and then they have all these novel flavors, and there's a shitload of caffeine in there, so of course it was effective because my body wasn't used to that. But then I started to really like the taste, and next thing you know, I'm getting an energy drink almost every day before the gym, and thankfully I've escaped that nowadays. But for a while that was kind of a tough phase for me, where I had to look hard in the mirror and be like, why am I really doing this? Do I really need this extra motivation to get in the gym and go hard? Or am I just wasting my money and putting these chemical ingredients into my body that are almost definitely more harm than they're worth? And, that's just an example from my life. And I noticed I would, like, search for other sources of novelty too. Like, when I would stop with the energy drinks, maybe I would want to buy something else, whether that be like a new article of clothing or a new book, which, like, the books are fun. You can justify anything, but, like, I guess what I'm saying is I found myself starting to turn a little bit towards materialism, which is kind of contradictory towards a lot of what I believe in. So I had to check that and plug that hole too. And you just got to kind of take stock of yourself and your own actions and realize where these desires are coming from, and are you just craving something new to spice up the monotony of everyday life, or do you actually need these items? Do you really need this? And that's kind of like the second half of my point about these items that people turn to for novelty. I think they should be used more as utilities than novelties. Outside of porn, I don't think porn has a place, but these other things, alcohol, weed, I mean, other harder drugs, nah, I don't fuck with that. But alcohol and weed, you can get down how you want to get down. I don't got an issue with it. But, energy drinks too. I'm not sure about gambling. That might have a place. But, like, the weed and the alcohol, you can have a good time with your friends here and there. You can have some drinks. You can have a smoke, And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that actually achieves that sense of novelty because it's few and far between. It's not something that you're doing on a daily or ideally even a weekly basis. It's a once in a while thing with other people, and you actually truly can enjoy yourself and cut loose. And it isn't a commonplace occurrence, And similar with the energy drinks, that should be used, speaking to myself here, as a utility. Like when I really am feeling extremely tired and I really want to go to the gym, but I know if I go in there feeling the way that I am, I'm gonna not be able to go hard, then I could turn to an energy drink. Like these things, they do have a purpose, and they can be used in a constructive and proper fashion. But I think that due to the monotony of everyday life, people turn to them unduly and they don't get what they're looking for. They end up in this dependency type state, and it's really, really problematic because you're not really getting that sense of novelty. It just becomes another addition to the mundane, and you just find yourself searching once again, unfulfilled and searching once again. So the second half of the video, what I want to talk about is really what I mentioned in the quote. To reach true novelty, one must make peace with mundanity. There's really no escaping the mundane. I mean, not necessarily in the present moment. In time, I believe it's escapable, but the only way to truly escape it and reach that novelty is through continued exposure and acceptance of the mundane. You can't run from it. You can't try to hide from it. You can't even really fight and struggle against it. You just have to accept it and come to terms with it. You have to work the job to get the money. That's just what it is. I don't always love it, but I have to do it, so I make the best of it. I try to cultivate and improve my workplace relationships, and that's something that really gives me a lot of joy actually in my workplace. I love the people that I work with. Even if the work is daunting, I got people that are there that will brighten my day up and they'll work with me, all that type of stuff, and that's how you can really come to make peace with the mundane. That's one example. Another great example that I think is continuous refinement of your daily habits. I mentioned this idea to somebody, and they mentioned something back that I really wanted to include in this video, like something like your morning routine. You can refine that to a place where you're really happy with just the way that you start the day. You start the day with things that serve you, and that starts you off in a great headspace to approach the rest of the day in a great and positive fashion. And things like that, finding ways to incorporate things into your free time that truly mean something to you. They might be mundane to somebody else. They might be mundane on their face, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but it means something to you. And that's how you can really come to make peace with the mundane in the short term. And in the long term engagement with it is how you'll end up escaping. So before I touch on that, I want to explain what it is that I mean by true novelty. So true novelty, rather than those light, watered down versions that I just covered, true novelty would be something that you could look back on in future years. You could look back on the experience and it'll still bring a smile to your face. The memory means something. You had an actual powerful experience that meant something to you. It inspired a memory. It was meaningful. I don't really know that there's a better, more concise way to say it than that. It was meaningful. It was outside of the norm. It was lasting. It wasn't fleeting. And a couple, I guess, examples of this are things like vacation. That's not necessarily in a full-time escape, but it's a short escape from the mundane, and it's a real example of novelty that you'll be able to look back on with positivity. You'll have actual positive memories of that experience, memories that mean something to you in the future, not just the memory of, oh, I drank this energy drink. That's not even a fucking memory. That's nothing. So that's kind of like one example of what I mean by true novelty. But the epitome and the height of it would be to actually escape the system entirely, to the degree that you can live comfortably off the fruits of your labor, and you no longer have to engage with many of these commonplace things that fall under the category of the mundane. Yes, you're still going to have to cook. Yes, you're still going to have to clean and do laundry. If you really fucking wanted to, you could hire people to do that shit if you had that much money, but I don't know that I would personally do that, but it's not about what I would do, right? It's not about that at all. The only way that you can reach those heights is through the continuous engagement with the mundane, going to work, making the money, building your resume so that you can end up achieving a position that's really in line with what you want to do if you're not doing what it is that you want to do right now. Kind of acquiring these traits and attributes that will help you live life more in line with your true purpose and escape what is the mundane. And it's not going to be easy. It's not really supposed to be easy. And this is another thing that somebody else mentioned to me recently. This is something that I've kind of been struggling with, is just like, I want to be successful, right? I'll just say it straight like that. And sometimes I get like caught up in literally exactly what I'm talking about right now, the mundane of just like grinding. Like, I'm fucking grinding, and it doesn't always feel like it's paying off in the moment. But my friend just told me, like, would it even be worthwhile if you didn't have to grind? If the success came right away, would you even feel proud of it? And that really helped me to reframe my vision and my expectations. And that's why I wanted to mention it to you guys in this video. So shout out to him for just kind of like helping to break me out of my mental paradigm and broadening my horizons a little bit on an area that I was struggling with. And it really was right on time with what I wanted to talk about in this video. So thanks go out to him. Shout outs to him. And, anyway, just like he told me, would it really be worthwhile if you achieve that success right away? You're going to want to say yes, because the mundane fucking sucks at times. When you really think about it, the answer is kind of actually no, because there would have been no like trials and tribulations along the path. You wouldn't have any struggles to reach the success. So that's not really kind of worth too much. A lot of what they always say is the destination's about the journey, right? Like, when you finally achieve the true novelty, a lot of the validation and enjoyment that you derive from it comes from the time that you spent toiling away trying to reach that point. And a great example of this is something like the gym. And I fall back on this example a lot, but I think it really fits here again, as it fits with a lot of other things that I talk about. And like, you can go for a long time, and it's a super mundane thing to go like week after week, year after year. It gets extremely repetitive sometimes, speaking from experience. And when you look in the mirror on a day-to-day basis, you're not really going to notice much change. But on a yearly basis, maybe, I don't know, a couple years, I feel like I didn't see a lot of progress. But once you hit like 5 years, then you can start to be like, wow, when I look back at pictures from when I started, I've come such a long way. And that's, an example, I guess you could say, of physical novelty, of actually transmuting yourself in a way that's more in line with your true desires. And it takes a long time. It takes that discipline, dedication, perseverance. But when you actually see the fruits of your labor, you're thankful, and that time wasn't wasted, right? And there's no way but through. There's no way except through those mundane actions. And another example that I think of, which, like, I hope I didn't paint the wrong picture earlier, but another example that I think of is something like investing, and earlier I touched on short-term, get-rich-quick type investing, which I think is a poor philosophy. But investing can seem very mundane at times, because in the short term, if you're not chasing the bag, like trying to get a quick come up, if you're being diligent and just setting aside some money each paycheck and putting it in something like a Roth IRA or a 401k or something like that, in the short term, that money, it doesn't seem that great, okay, at times. But when time comes around for retirement, and if you're lucky, you're sitting on a couple M's, you're going to be very grateful you did that. So, that's just another example of how this seemingly mundane activity in time can help you to achieve true novelty, which, really the basis of true novelty, in my opinion, is financial freedom. Because then you can pursue any novel type experience that you want without any fear that you're going to be fucked, without any fear that you're going to get fired from your job, stuff like that. You have true freedom to explore your passions and go where you want to go where life takes you, all that type of stuff. But you're free, you're untethered. And that to me is the height of novelty, rather than these more banal type experiences that people chase today. And when I say people chase today, I don't want to imply that it's their own fault, because I think this is a natural urge to devolve into these habits because of the monotonous nature of daily life. I think it's only natural. I don't think this is some moral failing, but I think that it's important to check yourself and determine why you're engaging with these things and whether or not that is really serving you in the way that you want it to. And then from there, you can reevaluate things and try and position yourself to be able to experience true novelty less frequently, but more meaningfully than experiencing these watered down versions of novelty on a regular basis that aren't really serving you or fulfilling you in any capacity. So, I'm not really sure that there's anything else I can really add today to that idea. It's just something that I kind of wanted to call attention to, the juxtaposition of mundanity and novelty, and how these two things are opposites, but like all opposites, they're inextricably intertwined. All opposites go hand in hand. That's just the nature of things. So you can't have one without the other. And in order to reach the one, being novelty, the one that you truly want, you have to engage with the mundane. And there's only one way, which is through this continued exposure, perseverance, and accepting. It's not going to do you any good to just rage away and, I hate my job. That doesn't fucking do anything for you, bro. That doesn't do anything. It's stupid, okay? Straight up. If you don't like your job, quit. I don't know what to tell you. Then you're not going to have money and you're going to rage about that. So everything in moderation, right? If your job is really that bad, then of course, try and find something else, I don't know. I don't know. But everything in moderation, and my point there is that it doesn't do you any good to just build up all this anger and frustration about the way that things are, because that's the way that things are. And things can and should be different, but right now they aren't. Maybe in time they will be. Ideally they will be for you, but maybe they won't be. So what sense is it to spend your time getting super agitated and bent out of shape about something that may or may not be, when what you really got to do is just push through and persevere and make the best out of the situation that you're in, no matter how mundane it might be, no matter how mundane it might seem, no matter what anyone else fucking thinks. Just do what you can and stay on track, yo. Stay on track, and in time, you will actually be able to achieve novelty. I don't know. I genuinely believe that. I genuinely believe that through continuous engagement, perseverance, diligence, all those types of habits that people think are cliche, you can actually achieve something meaningful for your life, and you can do the things that you want to do in the way that you want to do them, and escape from this system that seems so daunting at times. So that's my message for you. I hope that was somewhat inspirational and helpful. Just try and keep a watchful eye out for these fake senses of novelty, and try and put a limit on them if you can, if you determine that they're not really benefiting you, and chances are they probably aren't. And yeah, that's all I have today. So thanks, guys. Like I said, I hope that was interesting, inspirational, something I've been thinking about a lot, and like I said, something I've kind of been struggling with a lot, which is why I wanted to talk about it. We'll get through this. We'll get through the mundane, and we will reach novelty in time.